Dear colleagues, welcome to the special session on the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development with a focus on the Arctic region.
We are proceeding to the speakers, and the first on the list, we have Dr. Г.Г. Ахманов, who represents the program committee of the entire conference and also represents UNESCO MSU Center for Marine Geosciences. Unfortunately, Grigori wasn't able to join us today in person, which is why now we will listen to his video recording with the welcome address of the session and explaining the links between the IOS UNESCO and Moscow State University.
Dear friends, dear colleagues, on behalf of organizing committee and with a great personal pleasure, I would like to welcome you on special, but maybe one of the most important session of 9th MARESEDU conference. Marine Research and Education is an annual meeting organized by the Lomonosov Moscow State University and Institute of Oceanology of Russian Academy of Science. MARESEDU is usually held as an in-person meeting in Moscow, and this is the first year we are moving the conference online. Despite multiple downsides of not being in a room together, we are certainly grateful for being able to reach out to a broader community, and we are looking forward to having fruitful discussion with you later today. We also apologize in advance for any potential technical difficulties that might arise during the session, which are almost impossible to avoid during online events. But we have an excellent team of technical moderators who will assist us with any issues. The aim of this session is to introduce the audience to the main concept, social outcomes and current timeline of the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which is currently in its planning stage with planned kickoff soon, and to then think about how to achieve these outcomes in the Arctic regions. We will have the discussions in breakout rooms. And before, we will have a series of talks to provide some background to the questions that we want to discuss in groups. And we are mostly grateful to have Mr. Vladimir Binan from IOC UNESCO today with us, who will possibly better than anyone highlight the most up-to-date information about the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science. We then have Dr. Sandy Starkweather from US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and Riisager-Simonsen from Danish Center for Marine Research to introduce the Arctic Ocean Decade Action Plan development and the current stage of observance system in the Arctic Ocean. Last but not least, we look forward to the talk by Evgenia Kostyaная about the importance of early career professionals in the planning and implementations of the decade. Before we proceed to talks and discussions, in the last part of the welcome address of this session, I would also like to highlight some links between the marine research and training activities in the Moscow State University and IOC UNESCO to provide background and context for this session. MARESEDU conference itself is just 9 years young, but its roots reach back to almost 30 years. In 1991, the Training to Research TTR endeavor started by UNESCO at the initiatives of Faculty of Geology of the Moscow State University. And in 1995, this initiative with its second name, Floating University, became an official IOC program. At that time, the founding group of the researchers succeed in combining the two seemingly uncompromising needs for education at the university level and for cutting-edge research. And they formulated the concept that is reflected till now in the program title. 30 years ago, this approach was innovative and challenging, and no other program of the same nature existed in Europe or elsewhere. Since that time, the TTR approach has been accepted globally and applied fully or partially in many other endeavors. And since that time, the link between IOC UNESCO and Moscow State University remains strong. resulting in step-by-step constructing long-term capacity development programs of training in marine science. The overall teacher goal was formulated in the following way: to foster an international community of young scientists, well-trained, coming from a variety of nations and culture, but appreciating their differences and gaining from them, capable of handling advanced equipment and managing high-quality scientific data, collected and interpreted under the guidance of leading professionals from universities and academic institutions, getting involved in the publications of scientific paper. This goal was of current importance for all 30 years, and of course it is very relevant to the coming decade of ocean science. Since 1991, the TTR seagoing expeditions to the Black and Mediterranean Sea, Atlantic and Arctic Oceans were attended by more than 1,000 participants from 30 countries. Some 70% were students and early career scientists. In recognition of its achievements and in particular in its contribution to building international peace and tolerance, fundamental objectives of the United Nations, the TTR program was included in 1995 in the list of events for celebration of the 15th anniversary of the United Nations. To commemorate the United Nations 15th anniversary, the newly discovered and studied during the TTR-5 cruise bathymetric height and mud volcanic field within Mediterranean Reach was named the United Nations Rise. Later in 2010, the TTR program has received an award of the best educational program of IOC of UNESCO. From the first years till now, the training to research concept is implemented as an annual cycle where students are involved into intensive training, including theoretical knowledge and involving into cruise program preparation, then data collection during the expeditions, data processing and analysis in laboratories, and finally the presentations of results at international scientific conference and preparation of publications in recognized scientific journals. Since 1993, a traditional event in TTR annual cycle was post-cruise meeting. More than 1,000 participants attended TTR post-cruise conference. Priority were always given to talks by students and young researchers, while a more limited number of presentations on key issues were given by the supervisors and inviter speakers. In 2012, the traditions of TTR post-cruise meetings has evolved into much broader conference under the name Marine Research and Education, abbreviated now as MARESEDU. The first MARESEDU meeting and all the following after were devoted to the memory of Professor Michael Ivanov, a creator of TTR, its heart and leader for many years, who passed away in 2012. Just half a year before, he was decorated with the IOC commemorative 15th anniversary medal for his outstanding contribution to the IOC activities. Michael Ivanov was a gifted scientist, extraordinary organizer, and a nature-born teacher. His friends, students, and followers believed the importance of working together for a vision of seeing the ocean safe and secure. The gate of ocean science for sustainable development is an extra ground for us to think, to learn, and to act together. We have a fantastic range of participants today, from early career scientists and graduate students to senior researchers, officials, and private sector leaders from different parts of the Arctic regions and beyond. And we hope that bringing everyone together in group discussions will allow identifying new perspectives and identifying opportunities to achieve the goals of the decade. We aim to create a synthesis document as a result of these discussions that will feed into the ongoing Arctic Task Force initiatives contributing to development of regional implementation plan of the decade in the Arctic. With that, I will finish the introduction of the session and pass the microphone to Mr. Vladimir Binan to introduce us to the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Thanks again to all speakers, participants, group leaders, volunteers, technical moderators of today's sessions for your valuable contributions. We are looking forward to working together toward achieving the ocean we want, and hoping the discussion starting today will continue into future collaboration and actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grigory. And with that, we are proceeding to the next talk of our keynote speaker. And I'm mostly grateful to introduce Dr. Vladimir Binan, who is the Executive Secretary of the International Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. And in his keynote presentation, Mr. Binan will introduce us to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development and the key societal outcomes of the decade, which will form the core of the breakout groups and discussions later. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this introduction. Also, I'm very grateful for G.G. Ahmanav for that excursion into the past and glorious past, I would like to add, of this floating university and the history of MARESEDU. I actually learned also the new emphasis for me. It's not MARESEDU like I thought it was MARESEDU. Okay, good. Thank you very much for inviting me. I would like now to move forward with my presentation, and I will be really trying to introduce to you not even to the, I would say, formalities of the decade, but of its spirit, because this is the most important element for you to participate in this decade. So, you know, and like G.G. Ahmanav was speaking about history, I think it's very important for us to also to announce to you that on the 14th of December, IUC is turning 60 years old. We are still a very young organization. We have 150 member states. And just to give a definition of what it is, this is the home of ocean science in the United Nations system. So now let's move towards the goals. So the whole world actually is bracing to live better. And this is manifested in the United Nations system through a framework. The agenda, 2030 agenda. It's very surprising, actually. This on the slide, it's a wrong name. That it has a wrong name for the program, because it's 2030 agenda, the right name, despite I took it from the United Nations. So the main idea here is, and we speak about the ocean, the role of the ocean in sustainable development is not about only sustainable development goal 14 on the ocean. This is a host of other issues and problems, dealing with climate, dealing with food, energy, inequalities. So this is a holistic view on the world. But indeed, what is happening with the ocean is most important. And because of that, we really felt that the ocean science should work to resolve all the issues with the ocean. So I think our motivation came from the following. Came from the World Ocean Assessment of United Nations, the first edition of which was published in 2016. And I think the most striking conclusion of that assessment was that the humankind was running out of time to start managing the ocean sustainably. Indeed, the ocean is in crisis. So what we can do to resolve the crisis was the question that we were asking. So for me personally, this was related to the situation that I remember quite well from 2009, when there was a conference of parties, and our Danish participants remember that conference of parties of United Nations Framework Convention Climate Change in Copenhagen. The science was there, but nothing happened because the governments did not take a decision on that. So this, I think, led to the formulation of the social contract for climate science, which is now equally applicable to the ocean science. We really need to make sure that what we know, what we can recommend, manifests in actions. So, of course, we live now under the situation of coronavirus, and this is the first morning for a complete lockdown in France, from where I'm speaking. And the emissions of carbon you see on the screen are now dropping, but the whole world really need to address the issue of coronavirus, and then come back to addressing the issues of the ocean. Where we are in the ocean science, this is my personal assessment, but many people agreed with this. I think we have a science that is competent for problem diagnostic. It comes from the sense of curiosity and discovery. We actually need now the science that is able to provide solutions to our problems. We also have an observing system that is mostly competent for climate issues, for physical variables. We need actually a data system that will be describing the whole state of the ocean in convincing way, including biology, biogeochemistry, ecology, and the social data. So still remain huge knowledge gaps, and the society, I think, follows the principle out of sight, out of mind when it comes to the ocean. Ocean is not on the center point of international agenda. It is actually changing. So we need an ocean literate society and also well-informed and active decisions. Then our funding for ocean science comes mostly in research mode, and this affects the sustainability of observations. And in order to overcome this, we have to demonstrate to the whole world, including decision makers, the whole value chain of oceanography. Actually, oceanographic investments return $5 for each dollar of investment. And this needs to change as well. And there are big developments also in that area. And of course, the capacity is hugely uneven. And I will show to you a slide about this. So we have to move forward with a very strong capacity development component. I would like to illustrate just once the state of knowledge about the ocean. I can give you many examples, but I will give you just one. So let's see if it works, because I'm trying to move again the slides. It is very slow. So this is an image of a surface. So to me, it looks like a surface of an ocean in which you have underwater mountains. Probably geologists would see something well, suspicious here. But you know, I would see a trench here, some mountains. The problem with this image, it is not an image of the ocean. This is the image of the surface of Mars. And this is the fact that we know the surface of the Mars, our planet, much better than we know in terms of horizontal resolution of our own planet and the ocean of our own planet. So actually, this is an image already not from the astronomy. This is an image of the ocean depth, which is also of very high resolution. And the reason for that very high resolution is that this image was taken in the course of search for this Malaysian Boeing flight that was lost apparently over the Indian Ocean. And this on the slide, you see the search area, and the team went there with an equipment that is shown on the slide that actually was unable to operate in the waters of the depths that they found there. So that was the real situation. So people not even were able to determine what should be the right equipment to measure the depths in the ocean in that area. So you saw that slide. I'm going a little bit back on with that. So the slide shows to you very good resolution. But you know, after that survey, we have this resolution. But before that, in the global general bathymetric chart of the ocean of 2014, for that region, we have exactly this resolution. So this is just an example of how well or how poorly we know the state of the ocean. So we were motivated to change that initially in IOC, and I think now the whole world joins us. So after brainstorming in 2016, in 2017, IOC proposed to United Nations, and you see on the left side of this slide, an idea of decade of ocean science for sustainable development. So the motivation was to have the ocean we need for the future we want. So in December 2017, the decade was proclaimed starting on the 1st of January 2021, and we started to work with many partners towards creating the science plan for the decade. So the summary of this plan is also shown on this graph, and you can see there the vision for the decade, which reads the science we need for the ocean we want. I already outlined to you what is the science that we have now. So I think that we created in this process of designing the decade, in which I would say thousands of people participated, hundreds of organizations participated, many countries, dozens of countries responded and insisted on certain things. So now we have the plan. And I think this is exactly that most important element, that we would like to really ensure that there is an ocean by the end of 2030, hopefully earlier, that responds to certain conditions. We need a clean, healthy, resilient ocean, productive ocean, predicted ocean, safe in terms of risks or risk of disasters, accessible, inspiring, and engaging ocean. And can easily judge by these definitions of what is the ocean that we want. That is not only the qualities of the ocean or ocean water, these are qualities of people and their human relation with the ocean. We need to know about the ocean to be able to predict it. We need to be also inspired by the ocean, which is definitely a human quality. So this is where we would like to be in terms of our relation with the ocean. But also we need to start somewhere. And in the very inclusive process, we formulated 10 decade challenges. So let me very briefly run you through them. And you have, if you follow the logic of this description, you will remember all of them. So the ocean needs to be cleaned from pollutants and contaminants, including plastic pollution. So with the cleaner ocean and knowing better ecosystems will be better managed, and ocean can be, health can be restored. And then ocean can be used to feed the people through fisheries, saved to aquaculture. But feeding people is not the only benefit that comes from the ocean. There is a huge host of applications in sustainable ocean economy, which should move forward in a more sustainable way that would green-blue economy, would mean green-blue economy. And we have to do this under the influence of climate change, which actually creates additional disasters in the sense that more intense tropical cyclones and some other things that you know well. So this calls for, along with the, for example, tsunami threat, for design of and implementation of multi-hazard early warning systems for complex disasters. And, you know, we have to add coronavirus here. And for that, we need a comprehensive observing system. We need to have a digital twin of the ocean or ecosystem, digital ecosystem of the ocean or system of ocean data. The focus on data is critically important because it makes our actions in the ocean more transparent. This also requires capacity development, and we need to ensure that there is a behavior change in our dealings in the ocean. So this is where we are. And now I would like to introduce to you also, I think, strategically important notion of integrated ocean management. So the ocean that we need, actually, the only ocean that we can have is integrated ocean that is managed on the basis of science. For that, we need to observe the ocean, understand, to be able to predict the future state of the ocean, and also the consequences of our work in the ocean. And this will lead to different ways of managing the ocean. But also, if you look at the right lower panel here, you will see an analysis of IUC in terms of capacities of countries to publish in the peer-reviewed literature. And you will see, this is a map in which countries are shown, the areas of the countries are blown up a little bit or shrunk because of the number of publications. You will see 3 centers of power, North America, Europe, China, and but you don't see Africa on the list. So this is also shows the capacity. The capacity should be developed in such a way that no one is left behind. So now let's move to the next most important understanding. The ocean that is managed is managed through coastal zone management, through its establishment of marine special planning, contributing to the sustainable ocean economy, through scientifically based marine protected areas within national jurisdiction and beyond national jurisdiction, management of aquaculture, adaptation mitigation to climate change, and through policies, through focused research and capacity development. So this is what the vision of the ocean, to use science to move forward with management of the ocean and save the ocean. So now, on the 15th of October, IUC issued the call for action for the decade. So this call requests until the 15th of January next year to supply to us your ideas about the largest elements of the decade agenda. These are the programs of the decade. We also ask support for the coordination of the decade, but what is most important, that the plan is basically a governance element. We have our goals, we have our coordination structure, but now is the time to really supply to us your ideas on how we can move forward with the science of the decade, and we are going to process that information. And in the result, the whole community will agree on around the 10, maybe less, maybe more, large-scale programs. And you probably remember the World Ocean Circulation Experiment, Tropical Ocean Global Atmosphere Study, GGOV's Census of Marine Life, fantastic programs. So the decade probably will be the largest campaign in the history of natural science, including social science, which is most important, but it will be composed of very important research projects. So this design is starting. I think next half year will be very intensive in terms of brainstorming of how we move from governments to the real scientific content of the decade. So how to engage? So nationally, establish national committees, propose a decade action. Just this is the perfect time for this conference for you to organize, for your work in the Arctic, for your work in education, and also participate the communication campaign, Generation Ocean. So these are fantastic opportunities ahead of us. So I thank you very much for your attention. I'm ready to answer questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. I think it was a brilliant introduction, both to the decade and to the timeline and to the where we are and where we're going to. And I really enjoyed the comparison between the Mars and a seafloor. Unfortunately, we don't really have time at the moment to address any personal questions, but participants are very welcome to still type them in the chat if you wish to, and we will try to forward them to the speakers later. But at the moment, we have to move on to the next speaker. And we are now starting to introduce the regional setting. So now that we know the background to the decade, in the next two talks, we're going to be focusing on the Arctic region. And first, I would like to introduce Dr. Sandy Starkweather from the Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks, SAON, who unfortunately couldn't join us in person today as well, because it is 2 a.m., I believe, in her time zone at the moment. So she has kindly recorded her talk about the Arctic Observation Network, and it links to the decade.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the organizers of this meeting on the UN Decade for Ocean Science for the Arctic region for inviting me to speak about the linkages between the organization Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks, or SAON, where I am currently serving as chair, and the process being followed by the UN Decade for Ocean Science. My name is Sandy Starkweather, and I am a research scientist at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I apologize that due to time differences, I can't be with you in St. Petersburg during your live discussion today, but I hope these recorded remarks support your discussion. So I am currently serving as the executive director for the U.S. Arctic Observing Network and as the chair for SAON, which I'll talk about at greater length inside this presentation. I'm also serving as one of the working group chairs for the Arctic region meetings for the UN Decade for Ocean Science. So I have a little bit of a view on both sides here. And what I'd like to focus this talk on today in particular is SAON's newly initiated ROADS process. It's Roadmap for Arctic Observing and Data Systems, or the acronym we use is ROADS. And I've led this task on behalf of SAON, but I've been supported by a road mapping task force, and I'll give credit where credit is due at the end of this presentation to those who've been helping with that. But it's also been something that we've been developing in partnership with the Arctic Observing Summit. And so that's a lot of acronyms. If you have followed me up until this point, you will be in great shape for this presentation. And if I have lost you, don't fear. I'm going to do a deeper dive on all of these things as we go through. But first, I'm going to start with why. So why do we need a facilitator like SAON, and why do we need a planning roadmap? So we know, the folks gathered in this room, I'm sure, that Arctic changes have really been unprecedented, affecting the systems that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, like sea ice systems, weather systems, and even ecosystems, impacting things, human activities like shipping and fisheries management. And so observations and the data systems support all of our actions in response to these changes. Yet we know that due to systemic challenges related to planning, engagement, deployment across scales, these challenges have really been impeding our progress with helping the observing system support decision-making needs in the Arctic. And so I'm going to focus here in particular on one of the bigger systemic challenges that I think is really relevant for this particular discussion. I will call it the Arctic Authority Diffusion Challenge. Somebody today said it could also be called the Confusion Challenge. So many of us know that I could fill up this blank screen with acronyms and logos of Arctic organizations that have mandates to do planning, develop roadmaps, develop requirements for observing systems in the Arctic. And as a result of all of these many centers of action, it's difficult for us to channel them into common goals and objectives and make progress on our grand challenge for Arctic observing. So SAON has in particular learned a lot from thinking about this challenge as one of polycentric governance. So this is a term that's used widely in policy communities, and it's helpful for us to think about in our community, because we can recognize that based on what I just described, we have these many centers of authority across scales from local to global. And our desire is to see them interact coherently for a common governance goal, and that is the design and implementation of Arctic observing and data systems. So we learn from polycentric governance that you overcome diffusion through 3 different types of power. The first 2 really speak to rulemaking power and the kinds of top-down authorities that is not the space that SAON operates in. But the third type of power, the use of framing power, this is an appropriate space for SAON and other partners to operate in, where we can set norms and influence discourse across centers of authority. So today, I'm going to talk to you about 2 specific tools that SAON's used to generate this kind of framing power and common governance goals. The top being a product from 2017, and then SAON's roadmap that I mentioned that I'll talk more about. But before I get into the details there, one of the things I want to point out is that authority is actually the combination of power and legitimacy. So framing might speak to the power issue, But without legitimacy, it's very difficult to move forward in these planning spaces and generate much followership. So I'll try to highlight areas where SAN has been working on legitimacy and increasing legitimacy within the roads process. So a deeper introduction to SAN. So SAN is an intergovernmental organization. It unites Arctic and non-Arctic countries in its partnerships, along with Indigenous peoples organizations, academia through events like the Arctic Observing Summit, industry, other key organizations like the WMO and the Group on Earth Observations. And it unites them in support of a systematic network through structured facilitation. So SAN derives its mandate, or in some senses its legitimacy also, from both the Arctic Council and the International Arctic Science Committee that created SAN under the Nuuk Declaration in 2011. But it also has been recognized by more grassroots efforts like the Arctic Observing Summit, a biannual meeting, 300 people strong, largely academics, but also other sectors as well. And I pulled out this quote from 2016 where the summit in its conference statement really called upon SAN to take a more active coordination role for the implementation of Pan-Arctic observing. That was followed a couple years later by the Arctic Science Ministerial making a similar call to SAN to support a process to move from design to implementation of the Arctic Observing Summit. So these calls to action really shifted SAN into a different mode of operation. And that's reflected in SAN's 2018 strategic plan, where the first goal was to create a roadmap to a well-integrated Arctic observing system. So that's where the roadmap in the roads process comes from. But SAN's second goal is to promote free and ethically open access to Arctic observational data. So that's where we get the D in the data systems. And it's very important to us to do these two things together. And then SAN's third goal is assuring the sustainability of Arctic observing. And so because of this, we knew that the audience and engagement for the roadmap were going to be the funders that need to support the network, but also the partners that need to share the strategies to support implementation. So that brought us to the roads process. So I promised to return to this slide. Why do we need SAN roads? For the aforementioned reasons, and then recognizing that SAN's been given the mandate to facilitate, and roads is the type of tool it needs to take a more active role. So I mentioned, maybe I'll sit here for a second. So I mentioned that in response to this, SAN impaneled a task force, originally 12 people, who did a broad survey of what would be useful to consider in a road mapping process. And so that first led to our guiding principles. And I hope that you can see reflected in these that the kind of polycentric thinking. So first in the guiding principles, equitable inclusion of Indigenous peoples is essential, both for the types of shared benefits that we're trying to realize through the network, but also because of the skills and expertise that Indigenous observers can bring into our network. Second, we wanted to recognize that all aspects of the roads process should support broadly shared benefit, those sort of convergent goals that polycentricism encourages you to identify. Third, the planning process should complement and integrate current planning approaches, so from local to global. And so I think this is really a key linkage with the UN decade process, where the mutual recognition of our planning process and the decade planning process and how they intersect, I think is really a shared interest of both of these processes. And then the last guiding principle was that we wanted the roads process to support stepwise development. We know that not everybody is going to be ready to go at the same time. And so we wanted a process that could proceed stepwise and also be driven by grassroots identification of the foci. So SAON had a bit of a head start, in particular with its principle on shared benefits. In 2017, it had developed a societal benefit framework, an Arctic-specific societal benefit framework, the 12 benefit areas outlined on the screen. And you can see that this really exemplifies how SAON operates in a space that's inclusive of both operational needs and research needs, broad decision-making needs. The benefit framework is really, one of its strengths is that it's very comprehensive. It covers most of the things that people would like to see in an observing system. It's non-hierarchical. There's no prioritization within the framework. And the 12 areas are further specified into 42 sub-areas and 160 key objectives, which gets at one of the things that makes it difficult to work with. It's very, very broad. It doesn't lend itself very easily to ready starting points. But returning back to the strengths of a benefit framework like this, it does lend itself well to support multi-criteria decision-making, which is really critical when we're planning an observing system. We need to see how different types of needs align, overlap, find the sweet spots. And so the benefit framework helped us get started in our thinking about the kinds of planning tools we would like to see. And one of the tools that works well with this is referred to as value tree analysis. So we want the roads process to assess benefit within the observing system through value tree analysis. So what does a value tree analysis do? So on the one side, we see the observing system inputs generically described here. And on the other side, we see just a subset of some of the benefits that we're trying to achieve with our observing system. And in between this large blank space, often described as the valley of death, it's very difficult to understand how the observing system feeds forward unless we're able to add intermediate steps, oops, sorry, I went backwards, in the form of the value-added data products that flow out of the observing system and the applications that those products feed forward into, which are the things that ultimately support societal benefit. So value tree analysis provides an assessment methodology that brings together players who look at the end-to-end benefits of the observing system, understand how value feeds forward, identify where there's gaps and vulnerabilities where certain societal benefits might not be well addressed, or conversely, where maybe some aspects of observing systems or data products are real heavy hitters and are paying multiple dividends across the benefit framework. So a great tool for mapping out the state space, identifying the gaps, seeing how things fit together. But benefit or value tree analysis alone does not help us translate the societal requirements into requirements for the observing system. For that, we felt we needed an extra planning element. So again, in our analysis of the planning methodologies that were in wide use, one of the things that became very appealing to us was the concept of essential variables, which the global networks use to characterize predominant aspects of a given system, to break the problem down into smaller pieces, to give you more ready starting points, and also to give you really an interface for coordination that a value tree analysis doesn't provide. And so in collaboration with the Observing Summit, we took this concept of essential variables and said, what would be appropriate for Arctic? And so we recognize that a lot of the things we do for Arctic observing have been driven classically by regionally identified, especially science needs. but to some degree also our operational needs. But that to a greater degree, we need to start considering Indigenous-led benefit identification, getting back to this equitable inclusion issue and broadly shared benefits. We know that people within the region are in the best position to help us understand and to link into systems that are going to best support their own benefit for their own communities. And then last, we recognize that the essential variables of the global networks are also an important ingredient in what we're trying to pull together and into a coordination framework for Arctic observing. And so collectively, we identified what these converge into as a concept of shared Arctic variables. So we want to use shared Arctic variables as a planning concept within the Rhodes process to bring the communities of practice together, extend the definitions in some cases of the global variables in ways that are going to be more beneficial to regional observing needs or Indigenous identified benefits for communities, or in some cases, these might be new concepts that are not already in play in the global networks, but are highly relevant for the Arctic. And so in combination with value tree analysis, shared Arctic variables help us understand how we move from societally based requirements into requirements for the observing and data systems. And then it also creates an interface where we can talk about implementation. So we view shared Arctic variables as being developed in 3 stages. SAON is beginning to put together a framework for what it is calling its integrated advisory process. I want to underscore here that this is a future-oriented vision that I'm about to show. This is not our current progress, but I'm putting it out there just to plant the seed, and in particular for the UN decade to plant the seed about what it might look like to engage with SAON in the Rhodes process. So for shared Arctic variables, as I mentioned, step 1 is going to be assessment, value tree assessment. What are the most high impact variables that we can focus on in the Rhodes process? Step 2, developing for those shared Arctic variables requirements for observing and data management. Step 3, developing implementation strategies for those shared Arctic variables. We envision that these steps are going to be overseen and facilitated by an advisory panel, and that expert panels are going to weave through the process on areas within their remit. So I'll give some examples of what we think our expert panels might look like. So we may see regional expert panels. An example is a regional expert panel that's come forward out of the Bering Strait and adjacent seas area that would like to work on shared Arctic variables through a food security lens. They might look at a cluster or identify a cluster of shared Arctic variables and move them forward through the process. We might also see thematically based expert panels. So for example, the Global Ocean Acidification Network would be a good example of a global network that might want to do some Pan-Arctic work through the Rhodes process. And then finally, we may see more issue-driven expert panels. The example here being that AMAP has just recently concluded a study on marine plastics and has expressed a desire to work on a monitoring strategy. So this shows an example of how different groups might work on different variables. And then the reason we're showing this as a woven process is because through the advisory process, we recognize that there may be some common threads that need to get brought together. And that's just illustrated by the large triangle crossing over all of this. So as I said, a future-oriented vision, but this is how we imagine things will proceed when we kick off the process. So let's see, I'm trying to get to my last slide. I wanted to take a moment and talk about, again, linkages with the UN decade before I get to my concluding slide. This crosswalk between the ocean science outcomes and SAON societal benefit areas just is here to demonstrate that the value tree assessment is amenable to a number of benefit frameworks. And understanding how these benefit frameworks relate to each other is really what's important. Which benefit framework you use to assess benefit is important, but it also, if people have different benefit frameworks, it's not a deal breaker. We just need to understand how they relate to each other. So just a couple of concluding points. So overcoming Arctic authority diffusion, which I hope is also a shared goal with the UN decade. We need flexible planning tools. We have to recognize polycentricism, and we have to design processes that are going to drive meaningful convergence. We need policy mandates, and we need authorities to collaborate. And some of these are in place and some of them are not always in place, and organizations needed to figure it out together. And I hope we're going to do that through the UN decade process. Really critical that these kinds of efforts, they take their own specific type of investment, this type of planning, the facilitation, the soft policy, the glue money. And of course, we need ongoing communication and engagement vehicles. And for that, the Arctic Observing Summit has been a key partner. The UN decade process provides another opportunity. And indeed, this session here today provides another opportunity. And so with that, I just want to thank you again for including SAON in this session. I have listed the drafting team for the Rhodes process. It's been submitted as an article to a journal article to the journal Arctic. And so we'll keep folks posted on that. But of course, at any point, we're in engagement mode on the Rhodes process right now, and we're actively in the action planning for the UN decade for the Arctic. So there's a lot of opportunities to have these conversations. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy, for recording this presentation. Now we have some context both to the UN Decade of Ocean Science and to the Sustainable Observation Network in the Arctic, which will hopefully form the basis for us to be able to address the questions in the breakout discussions that we're going to have after the talks. In the next couple of minutes, we unfortunately are going to have a slight change in the order of talks, so I apologize for that. And the next talk that we are going to introduce is going to focus on something that is really critically important in the framework of the UN Decade of Ocean Science, and it is the involvement of the early career researchers in the process. So we are now going to pass the microphone to Evgenia Kostyanaya from the Institute of Oceanology in Moscow to talk about the role of early career ocean professionals in preparing the UN Decade of Ocean Science for sustainable development.
Hello, so my name is Evgenia, and I will talk about the role of early career ocean professionals in preparing the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Next slide, please. So I will start with a brief overview of how this initiative of early career ocean professionals started. And it was actually launched following the first global planning meeting, which happened in May 2019, where a group of early career ocean professionals, or ECOPs, that were present there, asked for several things. So they asked for representation of ECOPs at planning meetings of the UN Decade. They asked to hire a consultant that would facilitate efforts to include ECOPs in every aspect of the decade. They asked to create a working group of ECOPs. And they also expressed the need to launch a global survey that would identify priorities and needs of ECOPs in relation to the decade. So this all has been done, and we are very thankful to the IOC for giving us this opportunity and space to be seated at planning meetings, to take an active role in the participation of the preparation, of the UN decade. And next slide, please. So me, myself, I'm a member of the informal working group of early career ocean professionals. This group was indeed created in December 2019, and it initially consisted of 43 members. And here you can see some of our members from all over the world. So since then, the group has tremendously expanded. Well, the informal working group still consists of 43 members, but we have added a lot more people to the list of early career ocean professionals who are interested in the activities of the decade. And now I think we have over 120 people who are participating in our activities in one form or another. And next slide, please. So we also launched the global survey, which was done in December last year and lasted till the end of March 2020. We received 1,428 responses from many countries of the world. And the data that we received are really very informative and interesting, and helped us to create the foundation for our work so far, for the work that we have been doing in 2020. We received information not only about ECOPs in different countries, so whether they work in academia or they work in any other sector, any sector of economy, which network of early career ocean professionals they belong to. But we also asked them questions like what societal outcomes they are mostly interested in, what kind of challenges and scientific gaps do they think the UN decade will be facing, and what they as ECOPs can do, what suggestions, what ideas they have for addressing those challenges. And conversely, what the UN decade can do for ECOPs, which led us to the next slide, where I listed some of the answers and some of the top responses that we were getting. So those were responses to the question, so what do ECOPs want from the decade, and what are their priorities? What are the challenges that they are facing in their careers and in their work in the marine field? So one of the top things that were highlighted were the problems with funding for their research, for their travel grants, for the field trips. They also highlighted the necessity to get access to the information about how they can participate in the decade, what can they do, what activities the decade will entail. They also highlighted the need for more job opportunities and the gap between the higher education and job market. They also asked for more connection between science and other sectors of the economy. They also expressed the need for more tailored, more specific trainings, workshops, short courses, any really capacity development events and summer schools. And that such kind of events and capacity development initiatives should be transdisciplinary. They also asked for better communication and networking. So those results laid the basis for the formation of task teams. And this work of those task teams actually has been so far the core of our work as a group this year. So we came up with the following task teams. So first is the network of networks and information portal. Those are the two task teams that actually merged together last month. I'm one of the co-leads for this task team. We are working on connecting with the existing networks for early career ocean professionals around the world to make close partnerships with them. We are also working on creating and setting up an information portal, which is in essence a website, a platform, where we are going to do several things. So we are going to post the official, to share the official UN documents about the decade. We are going to post any news about our activities as ECOPS. We are going to share news from our partnering organizations, so from other networks. And we are going also to share any great examples, great cases of any organizations or individuals from all over the world addressing UN decade challenges or any marine related issues. Another task team is training and mentoring, which would take care of arranging trainings and workshops and some mentoring opportunities. Two other task teams deal with ocean literacy and youth engagement. So they are developing ocean literacy tools and instruments to raise awareness of the marine related issues, and they're dealing with engaging the younger generations. And two other task teams are corporate sustainability and coordination of ECOP activities. Next slide, please. So what have we done so far? So we have used the results of this global survey to add the needs and the perception of ECOPS into the draft of the implementation plan. And we as a group acted as one of the stakeholders for the editing and commenting on the drafts of the implementation plan of the decade, which happened in March and April this year. We also participated, well, some of us participated in the first and second global planning meetings of the decade. We participated in the 8 regional planning meetings for the preparation of the decade. We participate in regional, national, and global committees linked to various activities around the decade. And we currently participate in the preparation of the first international conference of the UN Decade of Ocean Science. And next step, please. So what are we going to do next? We are going to submit our application for the UN Decade Call for Actions. So as you know, which lasts until January 15th, to be endorsed, so that our ECOP program gets endorsement from the UN Decade, and we are hoping to get that endorsement and to be recognized as a partner for the UN Decade Stakeholder Forum. We are currently working on a paper on the results of the global survey, and where we analyze the results. And we are hoping to get the paper published within the next 2 months. We are working to secure positions for ECOPS to be members of every working group and committee related to the activities of the decade. As I said, we are working currently on creating a website, this information portal, which will be the core social media for our work, for our activities, and we are hoping to get this platform running by the beginning of next year, so that with the beginning of the decade we have a platform where we could share all those opportunities and news. We will work on the arrangement and creating trainings and workshops. Well, currently, unfortunately, will have to be virtual, but hopefully we'll also be able to arrange something in real life as well soon. This will be about any trainings and workshops, any virtual events for ECOPS from different regions. And we are continuing to connect and reach out to different ECOP initiatives and networks all around the world to establish better partnerships with them for mutual projects, for potential collaborations. If you are interested in any of the activities that I talked about, if you're interested in joining one of the task teams, I'll be very happy to hear from you, and you can you can contact me on this email that you see on your screens right now. if you're working on the Arctic and you think that it's essential that we arrange some webinar or for the ECOPs working on the Arctic, that would be awesome, and we'll be very happy to hear from you. So really, if you have any ideas, please contact me and I will redirect you to any of the other task teams you might be interested in. We are now working on creating a more complex organizational structure for the decade, but effectively our work is still based on the activities of those 6 task teams that I told you about. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Evgenia, for the brilliant presentation. This is really inspiring to see the involvement of the early career scientists, and we are hoping that as a result of this session, we might establish some new networks and you'll get some interest from the participants of the group. And in the interest of time, we now have to switch to the last talk of our speakers before we move on to the discussion in the breakout groups. And the last talk is going to bring together several different things that we were talking about earlier and that have already been highlighted in the previous talks. So Christian Riisager-Simonsen from the Danish Center for Marine Research is the coordinator of the so-called Arctic Task Force, which is the regional process for creating a plan for implementation of the UN Decade of the Ocean Science in the Arctic region, which is something that we are hoping the discussions during the breakout sessions of today's meeting will be able to contribute to. So we are very happy to have Christian with us today to be able to share some highlights from the process so far.
Thank you. So a bit about the motivation for an Arctic regional process in relation to the Ocean Decade. So as you are all aware, we are having the Ocean Decade coming, and we have had an international implementation plan, which is brilliant in itself and has been developed through multiple steps of co-design with lots of different stakeholders. But there was also seen a need to, you could say, translate all these global topics, global challenges to a more regional context. In order to, well, let's be honest, global efforts is basically just a collection of regional or local activities summed up. So the big question was, of course, how to ensure that the Arctic as well got a bit of focus as a part of this Ocean Decade. So one of the things which we decided in Denmark was to answer the call from the IOC UNESCO to organize a regional Arctic workshop. Now, this is not the first Arctic workshop because there was an original one in the beginning of 2020 in Tromsø in Norway, organized by the Norwegian Research Council, which took the first steps toward identifying what are the key points to consider with regard to the Arctic from an Ocean Decade point of view. And the original idea was to have a large international conference in Copenhagen in the spring of 2020, which obviously we couldn't go through with due to COVID-19. So to move on, we decided to go for a fully online format, which is actually ongoing at the moment, and where several of the people speaking today are involved, including both Anna, your host, and Sandy Starkweather, which is one of our working group chairs. So could I have the next slide, please? To condense the Arctic challenge and the opportunity of the Ocean Decade. Now, everyone in this online room is aware of the challenges facing the Arctic, both on clearly environmental paths, but also on the impact on our societies. So from our point of view at the Danish Center for Marine Research and in dialogue with the IOC UNESCO, we thought that the Ocean Decade was a brilliant opportunity to put a bit of spotlights on the particular needs of the Arctic and the particular types of collaborations which is so necessary in the Arctic, because it's not an environment like most others. So the key idea from our point of view to go through with the development of a regional action plan was to try to provide a unifying framework which integrate all of the existing Arctic strategies and basically lots of already very good and productive actions which is already ongoing. Some of you probably already know about the monitoring programs of AMAP and so on, for example. But there are lots of other good things as well. So again, the key motivation was to provide hopefully one guiding document for marine research and innovation and development activities under the umbrella of the Ocean Decade. And through this, hopefully accelerate some of the good efforts which is already ongoing and maybe identify a few new needs for particular types of collaborations and so on. Could I have the next slide, please? So in order to deliver this, from the beginning, the IIC UNESCO helped make this international task force, which you can see in very small letters to your left here with representatives from large marine research communities and institutions. So this was not a national panel, you could say. The key idea is not to have all countries represented because we're not interested in the national priorities. We're interested in the priorities of the scientific communities as such. So everyone on the board that will, in the task force, was supposed to represent larger interest than just potential national priorities. Then, in order to act as a task force, it was early decided that they should mainly work as an advisory committee. So basically, we at the Danish Center for Marine Research would then deliver the actual organization and the coordination of the particular processes, and they could help us basically review our ideas and our progress. And since the Danish Center for Marine Research is essentially just a collaboration of all Danish marine research institutions, they've decided to have a small secretariat, which is me and our professor here at the Technical University of Denmark, Colin Stedman. So we're the ones answering your emails when you write us as a part of this process. Could I have the next slide, please? So early on, we obviously had to come up with a few key bullet points for what the exact aim for such a development process should be. Because when you have stakeholders from all over the Arctic and several hundred people involved, you need to be quite clear in what it is you would like to achieve. So from our point, we try to develop these 4 key points, which is that the whole process of this Arctic Action Plan, of the development of it, is to, again, translate this global ocean decade into an Arctic context where it becomes relevant for the region. And that really means that it becomes relevant for the stakeholders. So that is both the industry, that is the governments, obviously the scientific communities, and also a number of other stakeholder communities. Now, obviously, when we work in the Arctic, you will have a lot of indigenous peoples whose interest also needs to be considered in detail. So this has been one of the efforts which we are still trying to pursue. Now, in alignment with, you could say, the core progress or the core steps in the ocean decade, they work with a number of shared global challenges for the world. So as a part of this translation work, our idea is to then go a step down and say, okay, so what are the specific Arctic challenges in order to meet the societal outcomes, which is presented in the implementation plan of the ocean decade. So these are achieving safe oceans, clean oceans, productive oceans, etc. And the next step is, of course, that when you know what your challenges are, is to argue for what kind of actions are then needed to address them. So what real world actions, of which many of them would likely be cross-cutting in relation to the Arctic. So hopefully when we are done with this process, in the spring of 2021, we will have an Arctic action plan, which actually has descriptions of the particular types of high priority actions, which we hope will pave the way for a number of Arctic Ocean Decade initiatives over the next decade. Now, we're not suggesting that we're making a final plan for a decade. You should never try to do that because things will and should evolve. So this is a first version, a first, you could say, structure, which can be used whenever people talk about, so what is actually, what does the Ocean Decade actually mean for the Arctic? What is actually the Arctic interest? There we have the action plan. Could I have the next slide, please? Yes. So the next question is, of course, then how do you actually go from these more or less fluffy ideas to actually delivering something on paper? So our approach was, maybe as I said earlier, to translate this decade action framework, this nice figure, which you have seen before, and then basically make working groups based on each of the suggested outcomes of the Ocean Decade. So this is very much about going into the process of actually delivering the solutions. So if you say you want this and this outcome, then how will we get there? So for each of these working groups, we have designated 2 chairs to lead this work, of which Sandy is one of them. So we have 14 chairs in charge of these 7 working groups. Each of them have additionally had I've been so fortunate to have a number of early career researchers supported by Apex to help the work in these groups. And over the next month, we are gonna have more than 250 people involved in each of these working groups to identify the particular challenges and the actions they need. So this is the thing in the red square up here. This is the work which is ongoing at the moment. Now, based on this, we will have the final input in December this year. And based on this, we will need to do some additional work from the task force side and from our side as coordinators to see if there are particular cross-cutting things which needs additional attention before we can make the first draft of the action plan in the spring of 2021. Now, this action plan obviously is not the final version because not every single stakeholder in the Arctic have had the opportunity to participate in these working groups, though they have been open for registration for everyone. The interest has been overwhelming. So even following our deadline, many more people wanted to participate in these groups. So we very much hope that many of these people will be aware when we have our open consultation in the spring of 2021, where everyone can go in and read the draft action plan, comment on it, and we will also do a virtual session where we will present the key suggested actions and the motivation behind them. So when we go for May 2021, we will likely have a final version, or well, we're going to have a final version of the action plan, which we can submit to the IOC UNESCO as the first, you could say, real translation of the Ocean Decade down to a regional level. So when I spend a bit of time to present you with this process, it's because that no one has really done this before as a part of the Ocean Decade. So we are the first region who tries to do this. So based on how successful this approach is, we might hope to see similar kind of efforts across the world following this. Could you have the next slide, please? Yes. So this is just, you could say, a more boring way to show the exact same thing, which is that we are right now going through a number of workshops throughout the end of October and November. And based on this, we will do the action plan drafting, which will be presented down here in March. Yeah, let's just take the next slide. Well, that was the the short introduction to the development process, which is presently ongoing regarding the regional action plan. Now, as many of you might be interested in chipping in at some point when we have the final draft, I highly encourage you to visit oceandecade.dk, where we will keep updating with new drafts when we have it, but also additional information on how we have approached this, who's the chairs of each working groups, and what kind of things we are anticipating which will come out of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your wonderful presentation. And I hope that as a result of this meeting today, we might find more people contributing to the process. We will share the presentations and the recording of the session today on our conference website. So you will be able to access all the links and have a closer look at all the processes and timelines that have been mentioned today. So with that, we finish the first part of the today's session, which is the presentations where everyone participating is invited to listen. And in the next part of our meeting, we are going to switch to another format where everyone participating is invited to take an active part in the discussion. So in the next half an hour, what we're going to do is we're going to divide everyone here in the meeting in the breakout groups. The breakout groups are going to be formed across the 7 key societal outcomes formulated by the United Nations that have been highlighted in the talks by Mr. Vladimir Binan and Dr. Sandy Starkweather, and Christian has mentioned them as well. But just to remind you, I will very quickly go through each of them and name them. So group number 1 is going to be talking about a clean ocean where sources of pollution are identified and removed. Group number 2 is going to be talking about a safe ocean where people are protected from ocean hazards. Group number 3 is going to be talking about a healthy and resilient ocean where marine ecosystems are mapped and protected. Group number 4 is going to focus on sustainably harvested and productive ocean, ensuring the provision of food supply. Group number 5, a predictable ocean where society has the capacity to understand current and future ocean conditions. Group number 6, a transparent ocean with open access to data, information, and technologies. And group number 7, an inspiring and engaging ocean where society understands and values the ocean in relation to human well-being and sustainable development. So what are we asking you to think about and to talk about? When you're divided into the 7 breakout groups, here on the slide, you can see the 4 questions that we would like you to think about and to address in the discussion. Those questions are with regards to the year-end decade of the ocean science in the Arctic region. The first question is, what are the key concepts that define the societal outcome that your group is focusing on? So for example, what does the clean ocean mean to you? The second question is, what are the actions that you think could be taken to achieve this societal outcome in the Arctic region? So what do we need to do to achieve the clean ocean? Question number 3, what are the key obstacles that individual researchers or community may face taking this action? So what stops us from achieving the safe ocean or the clean ocean, for example? And the last and probably most important question is, can you think of any ways forward to overcome these obstacles? So what can we actually do to achieve the societal outcomes? After that, we will return back to this main room in just half an hour, and we will ask each group to nominate one person to give a 2-minute overview of the discussions that were happening. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the main conference room. Thank you very much for taking an active role and participating in the group discussions. For the next 20 minutes or so, what we're going to do is we're going to invite just one participant from each of the groups to very, very quickly highlight some key takeaway messages from the discussion that you had in this half an hour. And please don't exceed 2 minutes in doing that. So we will start with group number 1.
Hi, it's Colin Moffat from Aberdeen, Scotland, who's going to speak. very interesting discussion. I've never known half an hour go past so quickly. So two main things. We're looking at clean seas. We basically concluded that it needs to be a two-pronged attack. The first thing is the science that is actually undertaken within the Arctic. That has to be on an ecosystem-based, multidisciplinary approach. We cannot exclude any of the factors because the biota is exposed to all the different factors. There's nothing that they're not exposed to. So we have to look at pollutants. We have in terms of noise, in terms of POPs, in terms of metals, in terms of eutrophication, in terms of marine debris, and take that together. The second thing that we have to do is in respect of dealing with the policy and decision makers and also the public. We have to get the messages out because so much of the pollutants are traveling in from out with the Arctic. This is not something that can be done by simply monitoring and scientific investigation. There has to be the communication side of things where we are dealing with policymakers, decision makers, and the wider public, getting the wider public to influence the policymakers and decision makers. So we have to do that, and we have to start tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Colin. Brilliant. Unfortunately, I'm afraid we will have to skip group number 2 because they had some technical difficulties and most of the members of the group 2 joined in the other conversation. So we'll move on to group 3, a healthy and resilient ocean.
Hi there. I'm Julia Stigwart from the Senckenberg Research Institute in Frankfurt in Germany. I was the moderator for group 3, and we had a similarly interesting discussion with some overlap to the points that were raised by group 1, but the makeup of our group included a lot of early career researchers, and so we spent some time talking about the importance of integrating knowledge across scientific generations and the difficulty that we have in terms of developing a depth of knowledge for these understudied systems like the Arctic, given that most research careers involve individuals having to switch systems so many times between different labs, different contracts, from a master's to a PhD to a postdoc, that it's very difficult for us to develop a strong knowledge base for understudied systems because the individuals who are doing that are constantly having to change gears and learn an entirely new system themselves. But we also talked about the great need for, as Colin mentioned from group 1, to control the connection from the input of human terrestrial activities into the oceans that are impacting the oceans, both in terms of pollution, plastic pollution, nutrient runoff, and of course, extraction in the form of fishing, but also energy pollution, such as light pollution and noise pollution, which are areas that are often a bit more neglected. And critical to all of this is an awareness between specialists, such as ourselves, and the wider realm that's influenced by policymakers, so that we can ensure that oceans, and especially the Arctic and remote regions like that, don't fall into the trap of being out of sight, out of mind. And as long as there's a constant increase and a constant drumbeat of awareness and celebration of the power and the potential of the Arctic region, that this will help to encourage a global participation and a global commitment to protect and to preserve and conserve Arctic regions.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Julia, for the very informative summary. And in the interest of time, we are going to move on to the next group, group number 4, a sustainably harvested and productive ocean. Please go ahead.
I guess that's me. We talked about a variety of different things, sort of starting with fishing productivity and then trying to move out to more uses of the ocean for productive ends. And I think what we established is that in scientific terms, ocean productivity is going to depend on all of these different scientific focuses: clean oceans, healthy and resilient oceans. It's all going to matter toward what is capable of being produced and needs to include social sciences and community voices and multiple ways of knowing and valuing these productivities in order to find solutions to the trade-offs that physically have to happen. And that ways to do that include transparency and data sharing across industries and better integration of community decision-making into all levels of the scientific production and dissemination.
Thank you very much. It looks like you managed to cover quite a lot in just half an hour. And we will move on to the next group number 5, A Predictable Ocean. And I just must say that I'm very impressed by the images and all the notes that you managed to input into the document in such a short time. Thank you. So group number 5.
I'm assuming it's myself who's going to be reporting back. It's Sheila Heymans here. So I guess the question is, you know, how does a predicted ocean feed into the societal outcomes that we need? And I think that in order to understand and predict the ocean, we really need to understand, well, we need to have the data to know what's happened. We need to understand what's happening in the ocean now, what's happened in the ocean before. So we need the data and the information, but we're also going to need models to try and predict how that goes forward. So we also need to understand the processes that has happened in the past and how that might change in the future. And in order to make this available to other people, we really need to educate people. We need to have people understand not just what's in the ocean and how these things have changed over time, but also that our models predicted into the future will never be certain. So there'll always be uncertainty. So we need to educate people to understand that first of all, to care about the ocean and to understand that we might be able to predict what happens in the future, but we'll never be 100% certain. And in order to do that specifically in the Arctic, we really need to educate people about the Arctic and about how things have changed over time and how we think they might change into the future. So we really need a good science-society interface. We need to be able to speak to the population and make it clear to them. So for instance, the Digital Twin Ocean call that's just coming out will be one way of doing that. You know, ocean citizen science is another way of doing that. The key obstacles that I think that we have is that we don't have sustained observations. Observations of the oceans in general are funded on a shoestring and are not fully funded, you know, not like for weather predictions where there is just funding, or to keep the lights on in the streets, there is just funding for that. Ocean observations are always on a shoestring and only kind of funded for the next 2 or 3 years. So I think we really need to work on that. And I think, yeah, the ways that we could do that going forward is making sure that we have good education and good visualizations and sustained observations.
Thank you very much, Sheila. That was a very interesting summary. And I think there was a lot of overlapping topics, especially with the discussion in the next group that we're moving to now, a group number 6, a transparent ocean with open access to data, information, and technologies. Can we please have a quick 2-minute summary from you as well?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Yulia, and I'm from Geological Institute of Russian Academy of Science. And we had a quick discussion about the transparent ocean and what it actually means. So the key results that we have from this discussion is that it actually means not only data, but also the communication between scientists, between all the research groups that do science or make decisions about the oceans. And we have problems in this communication and data sharing. Different scientific groups have different level of access to publications and research results. And also there is no unified policy for global data sharing. It's on every country decides for itself how it shares the data. So not all the scientists have the access for the data. I think that's the main things that we discussed. And as a ocean bathymetrist, I have to stress that bathymetry is the base of any ocean studies, and sharing bathymetry makes us one step closer to protected and clean ocean and any other goals in ocean.
Thank you very much, Sheila. That was very interesting. And indeed, bathymetry is an important source of data. In the interest of time, we're going to have to move to the last group, the Inspiring and Engaging Ocean.
Hi, I'm from group number 7. I'm Austriac, and I am actually a student at NTNU in my master's. So we had a lot of master's students in this group. We had 2 main topics that we kind of wove throughout all the questions, both the establishment of good knowledge bases, because the ocean is still very understudied. We talked about how important it is to fill in those gaps. And when the public is wanting concrete answers, it's very difficult when we don't have concrete answers yet. So we talked about the importance of further research. And we also talked about engaging the population and lots of different methods to engage the population. So we talked about with younger generations using social media, perhaps investing time in trying to collaborate with YouTubers and influencers from various channels that are popular now, and like SciShow and those kind of big science channels. And then we also talked about using psychology research to find the best way to communicate climate science, ocean sustainability science to the public, because it hasn't been working the best, and we need to get people willing to change their habits and willing to do things. And then we also talked about how important it is to engage the population in physical activities to provide a more concrete connection with the ocean. So just from various things like beach cleanups and those kind of things, but also finding ways to engage more landlocked areas and bring relate ocean issues to them and their life. Yeah, so I think that covers about what we talked about.
Thank you very much, Astrid. This was very interesting. And the 7th societal outcome was the latest to be added to the agenda of the Decade. So it is great to see that some fruitful discussions were happening in this group. And once again, thank you so much, everyone, for your valuable contributions. If you think that there is something more you want to talk about or to input into the shared document, please feel free to do so. It will be open until the end of the weekend. And in this last couple of minutes of this session, what we're going to do now is go back to our speakers and just ask whether they have any final comments.
Thank you very much, Alisa. But you know, I'd like probably to reflect on quite interesting summaries of these breakout groups. You know, I think that the current discussion in the decade should go already beyond the notion of societal outcomes to the more scientific design. So I encourage you to go there. And of course, the scope of issues is incredibly broad, and this requires some platform for co-design of science. So once again, this 3 to 6 months will be incredibly important in this. And IC is not able to provide platforms for co-design for all the regional and global activities. So I would like to invite you to self-organize, but at the same time, please contact us so we could just give you some food for thought coming from the other discussion groups. And with that, I think we'll be able to move forward on formulating the programs for the decade, which will be a combination of global programs, setting global standards, and also regional programs addressing regional issues. Thank you also Sheila and many others who mentioned citizen science. So it's really an important societal organization to help our ocean. So, and the one key element mentioned in the discussions was the data. Just be prepared that we will be starting to organize a data conference for the decade. There is an IUC data policy about free and expeditious data exchange, but IEC is only coordinating, so we have probably to organize a larger look at the policy and also arrangements. Once again, ecosystems of data is the way forward to more transparent ocean, and the transparent ocean is the way to changing behavior. Thank you very much for this interesting talk and the whole seminar. Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. Christian, do you have any final comments just before we close this current session?
Yes, but that is actually yet more of a question, because I think I've said already what I wanted to do. That is for Vladimir, actually. So the other day there was a interesting paper in Science which regards to some of the natural world in the Arctic, which we actually know quite a bit about, which is the stocks of whales, where we have whale stocks, in this case narwhals, which is actually rather well monitored. We know how many there are, we know what is a sustainable catch, and then you have governments just deciding to catch way more. So this is where the science gets very close to politics. And I encounter that the more areas you venture into, the more of these cases you will have. So this is one of the areas where I'm still not quite grasping, how far should the Ocean Decade actions go? How much can we address politicians with the kind of actions we will pursue over the next decade?
I think I should respond, right? I take it as I'm given the floor. I hope Anna and Alisa don't mind. So then, indeed, this is a decade of ocean science, the science for sustainable development. And indeed, IEC is an intergovernmental organization. We participate in the United Nations discussions on this conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity beyond areas of natural jurisdiction. So there is, I think, a very significant change in the paradigm. And our role is to ensure that there is more and more ground for transparent decisions in the domain of governance. This is happening from us by promoting science, but this is also happening in other domains. This high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy is also proposing certain ways of integrated ocean management, better governance, kind of wider spectrum of governance. So I think all this should give its fruits soon, but we have to do the homework in the sense that science has to deliver the message, and the message from data to communication, then to reaching the decision-making sphere. I think we are getting there slowly but surely.
Thank you very much for the question and for the answer. That was very interesting and inspiring. Unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes until the next session starts, so I think we will need to wrap up here, but I really hope that the discussions that started here and the links that started here will continue on after the meeting, and we are looking forward to seeing you in the later sessions and to continue working with you. Thanks so much for all the speakers, all the participants, and our technical moderators of this session. Thank you and goodbye.